Hello and welcome to another edition of Off to Tube and AP European History Distance Learning. So when we left off in the last video, we talked about how the revolutions of 1848 failed to make any sort of significant change, and largely European politics went back to again another wave of conservative domination. However, we did see some changes in the way that politics was brought about, and this idea of realpolitik, as politicians and those in power are going to begin to um, realize their situation and take practical steps towards achieving whatever aim that is. And of course, that aim is going to be in staying in power. We also looked at how the time period right after 1848 entered into this era of realism. Now, that's not just artistically, but also just intellectually. We looked at how communism and anarchism were ideologies that tried to put more practical implications on how to improve society because of the changes brought about by industrialization in the beginning of the century. Now, while we see these developments happening, we see the building of nations politically. It's also really fascinating and fun to study this part of the 19th century because this is where the Industrial Revolution comes back again, and we have what's known as the Second Industrial Revolution. And of course, just like the first, we're going to see even more dramatic changes happening in European society, again, shifting and changing and constantly causing politics to shift and economics to shift and social hierarchies to shift. I mean, everything again is going to continue to shift as we see yet another industrial revolution. And this is a time period where we really see industrialization taking off in Europe, and especially becoming again the dominant mode of the economy. Now, it's not going to happen everywhere in Europe, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through our Google Slides. But when we look at the Second Industrial Revolution, it is going to help to usher in what is known as mass society. For the history of Europe, there has always been kind of two major societies. There's always been the high culture, the society of the nobility and the elites, and then there's always been popular culture, the society, the culture of the peasantry, of those who were not on top of the social hierarchy, the common folk, if you will. So what we see happening because of industrialization is the creation of one society, where we're going to see that things that people enjoy for fun, people enjoy artistically, people enjoy musically, the sorts of values and beliefs that people hold. It's all going to be something that the entire society, from the top to the bottom, all share. Now, are there still going to be certain idiosyncrasies? Well, of course, but we see this development of mass society, and with the Second Industrial Revolution, and with the changes that are brought about, it is known as a time of great and incredible progress, of technological innovation, the increase in the standard of living, with all these new gizmos and gadgets that are being invented. You see new ways of having fun and enjoying leisure. And that's where the time period from about 1871 to 1914 is known as La Belle Epoque, the beautiful epic. And this is going to be the time where Europe really comes to the height of its power and its wealth because of industrialization. And so what I want to do with this video is I want to just give a brief kind of background of what that means, especially as we look at mass society surrounding the bourgeoisie or the middle class. So industrialization part 2. Now your textbook goes through it, so I'm not gonna harp on everything, but there are just some changes that I wanted to discuss, and differences between the first industrial revolution and the second. Well, with the first industrial revolution, we saw that Britain was king. The British were the first to industrialize. They are going to generate much of the industrial might and power of Europe. And most places around the continent are just going to be trying to catch up to Britain. Well, by 1850, and definitely by the end of the 19th century, you see Germans actually surpassing the British, and becoming the most industrial and technologically advanced society. And And so you see just not necessarily the British losing power, the British are going to continue to, but you're also going to see the continent begin to catch up a little bit. Now, why is that? Well, of course, the first is that the British industrialized first. So while they had a leg up on the competition, by the time a lot of these European nations are industrializing, the British technology is almost out of date. And some of those machines that they were using at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution were beginning to fall apart. And so the continent was able to build upon the foundations laid by the British, while the British then were kind of having to go through a second phase of restructuring. And so that's one of them. Again, the British politics have always been stable, but you also see the stability of politics, and especially the government's increased role in protecting the economy during the Second Industrial Revolution, which we're going to talk about in just a second. The Second Industrial Revolution is also known because its major innovations and developments are in chemical processes and electricity. Of course, I understand that when you see steel, you don't necessarily think, well, chemicals. Well, the Bessemer process is a process of using chemical reactions in order to create a better form of iron, and so steel is going to be probably one of the biggest innovations during the Second Industrial Revolution, and steel that is going to help to build and create these modern cities that we're going to be looking at. For me, the development of steel is such a it hits close to home for me because growing up outside of New York City, seeing all of the beautiful innovations and the explosion of industrialization is right before my eyes, and that you see these giant tall skyscrapers, none of which would be possible without the development of steel. And then again, electricity is going to become a major proponent. Instead of coal and fossil fuels being used in order to power all of the machines, you're also then going to see electricity being developed. Now, electricity is going to have a major impact not only on powering machines, but also on allowing workers to work even longer with the invention of the light bulb. It's electricity and chemicals. So if the first industrial revolution is that of iron, is that of steam engines, you now see steel and electricity becoming the poster children of the Second Industrial Revolution. Like I mentioned before, you're going to see the return of the tariff. You're going to see governments taking an active role in intervening in the economy, going against liberal laissez-faire, if I'll say that, but especially trying to protect industry at home, especially as you start to see a growth of the global market and a growth of industrialization everywhere. So with that, you're going to see kind of a hindrance of trade, but you're also going to see a varying use of or varying protections for industries at home. And then, of course, you're also going to see the development of big business. Now, this has been a generic trend in Europe since the development of joint stock companies, but this is where you start to see cartels and monopolies developing, cartels being companies of similar companies that are producing similar products are going to be essentially fixing prices and working together in order to control the market. And then, of course, you're going to see some businesses are going to grow so large that they're going to have the sole control over the production of a certain good or service or something like that. So businesses are going to become absolutely massive. Now, this is a lot of different impacts, and that's going to be part of what your assignment is to look at some of those changes that develop. But these are sort of the context of what's going on. Now, of course, how could we ever talk about the development of mass society if we don't realize that the mass society is going to revolve around the growing middle class? Again, in European society, you always had the haves and the have-nots. You had the high culture of the nobility, and then the popular culture of the peasantry. Now, those were separated by incredible leaps and bounds in wealth. And so, during the Industrial Revolution, we see the growth of this new middle class. That doesn't mean that the nobility lose their wealth, and it doesn't mean that peasants or the working class really find themselves doing better. But you see more and more people growing in this new middling class, this class in between the high culture and the popular culture. And we talk about mass society. One of the major shifts of industrialization is the fact that the middle class is going to play a massive, massive role, not just economically, not just politically, even as we've already seen as we see the liberalization of politics, but the middle class is going to have a major social and cultural role as well, as they are going to define mass society. So, who are they? Who were they? I guess is a better answer since we're in a history class. But who were they? Well, of course, these are the well-to-do industrialists. These are the people in the beginning of the first industrial revolution who had owned the factories, who had started these businesses, who were driving and pushing for the industrial change. But this is also going to include professions that we consider pretty prominent and high class and status today. This is where the lawyer is going to become even more important, especially as you see the growth of industry and property and the need for more and more cases to go to the courts in order to try and catch up to all the changes that are happening. It's one of those really interesting things when you realize how quickly things change and that the law sometimes has to also try and keep up as well. It's really fascinating when you start looking at it. You also see doctors rising in prominence, especially as during the Second Industrial Revolution, you're going to see a huge advancement in the way that medicine is even studied and taught and developed. I mean, thank goodness you start to see vaccines being developed. You start to see pasteurization. You start to see this is when Europeans are going to begin to become a little healthier because of their increased medical knowledge. And this is going to mean that doctors are going to rise in prominence as well. Of course, you're going to see those who are in the civil service, those who are serving the government, those who are local municipalities. But you're also going to have these new groups, these professionals who are going to be applying their specific knowledge to helping grow business practices and make innovations. That's going to be engineers. That's going to be architects, accountants, chemists, and they're going to be developing these professional organizations. Now, sorry, I need a little bit of water there. So as we're seeing the middle class, again, I hope that you're seeing that this is a very much so a huge span of people. There's the upper middle class, there's this middle class, but there's also a lower middle class as well. Those who are small shopkeepers, small traders, manufacturers, some prosperous peasants, teachers would be a part of that. And when we talk about who these people are, it's also very important to understand that they had a very clear understanding that they were the middle class. They had incredible class consciousness at this time. And listening to one of my lectures before preparing for this, it always struck me that they even had a conference of the petits bourgeois, the little bourgeoisie, the lower middle class, where people like teachers would be going there. But again, the middle class very much so saw themselves as a joint group with a common set of values. Now, which we're going to talk about in just a second. Another group of middle class people, especially as you start to get into a more and more industrialized society, is going to be those sorts of individuals who are needed in order to do the everyday business of business. The traveling salesmen to sell the products, the bookkeepers, bank tellers, telephone operators, as we see the telephone, first the telegram and telegraph, but the telephone being invented. Secretaries are going to become very, very important during this time. It's going to start as a male profession before it becomes a female profession, but more and more women are also going to be a part of that as well. And any job that you are not using your hands or your back is going to be known as a white-collar job. Why is it called a white collar? Well, because when you go to work, you're going to wear a business attire. You're going to wear a white collar. When you go to work in a factory, you might still be wearing a collar, but it's a lot of times those professional uniforms of factory workers or tradesmen were often known as blue. That's where you get the blue-collar jobs versus white-collar jobs. Now, the middle class. When we look at the middle class, again, they develop this idea of a class consciousness with a common set of values. And middle class values are going to become the dominant within European society as a whole. And so the first thing with the middle class worldview is they believe that hard work is absolutely essential. Idle hands do the devil's work is a common phrase during this time, right? You need to be working hard and doing something. That means your time needs to be very organized. That means you need to be running your day in a very strict schedule. You need to be on time to everything. So working hard is an essential part of it. Now, of course, progress is not just through hard work, but also through scientific development. So they believe themselves to be very logical, very reasonable people, the rational world, free from emotion. It's the numbers that matter. Um, there's also this idea of morality, and one of the things for a middle class person is to be very respectable in nature. So how do you show your respectability? Well, of course, it's going to be through your actions, like we said, through your honest hard work. It's going to be through your business dealings. You're going to show it through your dress and the way that you carry yourself. You're going to make sure that you're dressed to the nines at all times and looking very sharp. Um, um, Bespoke, if you will. But morality also means that you uphold Christian values and that you are ensuring that you are going to church every Sunday. You better make sure that everybody sees that you're in church every Sunday. And part of morality is also giving to charity. The middle class was hugely charitable at this time. So while yes, you can look at the middle class as these evil businessmen who were just stamping on the backs of the poor in order to make their money, but they're also the ones that are going to be creating. They're going to be creating things that are hoping to fix the social ailments of the day as well. And that's something that continues to be very important for the middle class, especially as we see in Santa Barbara with the incredible numbers of relief organizations that we have. And then, of course, what has to be understood is that while may not have been totally conscious, there was a subconscious fear within the middle class that they could fall down to the working class. They had a very good understanding of social mobility. Through hard work, through respectability, one could then achieve greatness. However, if one isn't that way, or if one slips up morally does not work hard, then they could then wind up in the dregs of society, of the working class. And so there's always this incredible fear, which is why part of the middle class is always looking for ways to improve oneself. That's where the popularity of self-help books come about. And my goodness, with this quarantine, if social media is not just one giant self-help book, if it's not do this workout, it's try this new recipe, it's this and that, that's it. It's people just trying to better themselves. And again, that's because middle class values are dominant in mass society. And so that's the middle class worldview. And again, you can see that in these images here, the middle class worldview, making sure that one is bespoke in their dress. You can carry a cane, even though you might not need one. It's just for walking. Make sure that you are wearing the most bourgeois of outfits, the suit, right, and the top hat. Make sure that your facial hair is trimmed to a certain way to show your respectability. It's give yourself a perm, I guess. I don't know if that's actually a perm, but it's just fun to look at that. So again, you see this bourgeois attire. Part of being a bourgeois person is working incredibly hard, but also taking time for leisure. So taking time to walk in the park, taking your family down to the seashore at the weekends. Again, all of these things are going to be bourgeois identity. Now, even the bourgeois home is something that should be seen as a respectable institution. And with a bourgeois home, you wanted to, in your city urban apartment, make it look like you could pack as much stuff as would be in some chateau of the nobility, but you wanted to make sure that you showed people within your home that you were respectable. So that means having a bunch of little trinkets all around, having wallpaper that displayed your wealth, including designs on your ceilings that showed that, chandeliers, beautiful furniture. A piano becomes a part of, and music, and being able to play music that shows hard work, that shows determination. So the piano becomes actually a bourgeois symbol within the home. And if you can see, not only is this home decorated to an incredible, way more than my house would be decorated, because we follow the kind of rustic simplicity of the valley up here meets modern. Anyway, you can ask my wife about it, but. You can see it's decorated like crazy, but it's also going to be very clean and tidy and organized and perfect, because that was part of being a respectable bourgeois, was keeping a clean and tidy, respectable home. which then leads to then the changing role of women, and that's going to be part of what your Google Slides are going to be talking about. But when we talk about morality and Christian morality, one of the really interesting things that happens during the 19th century is that morality leaves the church's role a little bit and actually is brought into the home. It is the woman, the wife, the mother who is supposed to be the spiritual center of the family. The man is too busy going out into the dark, dirty, disgusting world. The woman is the one who is pure, spiritual, almost angelic, and therefore it's her job to raise very Christian, respectable, moral children. And during Christian holidays, it's her job to make sure that there's the Christmas tree that is out so that the family can celebrate and revel in the common Christian values that the middle class shares. So it's actually where we get a lot of the traditions that we have even today for Christmas. Yes, of course, Santa Claus is an invention of Coca-Cola. I get it. But the Christmas tree is a 19th century bourgeois innovation, which is another example of Christian traditions being brought into the home and under the responsibility of the woman. Again, bourgeois society is going to spread all around. They're going to see also mass leisure time, and I thought this was just one of the most interesting thoughts or images that I came across. This is a Russian spa, again working hard but also taking time to relax and improve oneself. So this is how Russian massages worked and stretching in 19th century spas did, which is just really kind of fun to see the lengths in which they went in order to improve their bodies and rejuvenate themselves. But again, this is where taking your family out to enjoy time on the seashore, this is where you're going to see boardwalks, this is where you're going to see the development of amusement parks. Coney Island is going to be one of the most famous in the world. I used to go there as a kid to the aquarium with my aunt and my grandparents. If you've ever been to San Diego, the Hotel del Coronado, that's an 18th and 19th century a place of relaxation and fun to go and after you're working hard to also spend some time as a family as well. And then of course there's also the movies that you should be watching as well. Oh, it's unavailable. Well, that's just too bad. But if you look at the invention of movies, this is also going to be a time where the bourgeoisie, as part of their leisure, is going to go and enjoy a movie. And that was the Lumiere brothers. One of the first moving pictures ever made was of a train. And people were so scared of the moving picture that it is reported that they actually ran out the back of the theater in terror, screaming, thinking a train was about to hit them, which is really interesting. So as we look at this development in the 19th century, and we see this development of mass society, this Belle Epoque, fueled by the Industrial Revolution, there's a couple of assignments that I'm going to ask that you do. And the first is going to be this Google Slide assignment. Within this Google Slide assignment, you're going to use Chapter 23 and the sections that each of these these headings fall under, and you're going to give me a couple of images that represent some changes that happened in the Belle Epoque. What are some shifts that happened because of all these developments? And then for each of those, please write me a written explanation for why. So you can see that each of these ones are going to have a couple people involved. And now I would like that just each person does one image, and then in the speaker notes, go ahead and explain why it changes. What is causing this shift to happen? And again, make this fun. Put images in there. If you feel like you need to, you can label the images as well, just to help out your classmates. Well, the second thing that's really fascinating during this time is this is actually where we see the development of modern cities. Again, with the innovations of steel and electricity, you're not only going to see society changing and culture changing, you're going to see the physical landscape of Europe changing. This is where we get cities like I was talking about, New York City, but within Europe, this is where you get Paris being the Paris that we know, this city of lights, the city of love. I mean, that Paris is going to become a part of the Second Industrial Revolution, especially with the innovations of Napoleon III. Vienna is another city that is going to abandon the agricultural roots that when I say agricultural, the feudal roots that it had. It is then going to turn into another example of a modern city. So you are going to be looking at documents that are from the Wisner book that are linked here into this assignment, and you're going to choose either Paris or Vienna. You get to choose whichever one you want. And you are going to be looking at essentially to what extent were they transformed. And so I know this says causes and effects. That's actually not. I'm just going to look at evidence of restructuring. So evidence of restructuring. How is Paris changing, or how is Vienna changing, and how is Vienna and Paris staying the same? So to what extent are these cities being transformed? And you're going to see evidence of it. Now, just make sure that you note as you're going through, the documents are jumbled. So I divided them up into which documents go through Paris and which documents go through Vienna. So just be aware of that. For each of these sections, I want you to do a hippo. You do not have to do it for each document, but each of these documents kind of go together. So for each of these sets of documents, I want you to do a hippo and then give me evidence from the documents. Then, of course, you're going to go down. You're going to essentially identify and explain one continuity and explain an analysis statement. You're going to identify and explain two changes, and then you're going to choose, you're going to tell me which documents go in there. You're going to explain why in an analysis statement, and then you're going to write a thesis there. So both of these assignments essentially are looking at the dramatic shifts that happen in the second half of the 19th century, as we get closer and closer to World War I, and as we get closer and closer to the end of European supremacy throughout the world. And so thinking about all the shifts that are happening, whether it be the Belle Epoque and the creation of this mass society, and or even the creation of modern cities. How is this society shifting and changing because of the developments within the second industrial revolution? I hope you have fun discussing and researching and learning about this. If you have any questions, please email me. And until next time, opt it all out.